Hey guys, it's Dr. May. How are you today? Welcome to this talk. We're going to be talking about boundaries today. And although in sensory motor psychotherapy, we did have another lesson, lesson 19, called a somatic sense of boundaries, this one is going to build on that even more. And it's going to help you to understand your boundary style and then learn different techniques to develop a healthier sense of boundaries from the starting point of your current boundary style, okay? I hope you find it helpful. It seems to me that most of us could always stand to do a little bit better in our boundary setting. So these are some great tools that I think will be helpful for you. All right, so here we go. All right, so boundary styles and relationships. Okay, so just as a review, I'm sure most of you have a sense of what boundaries are, but just wanted to define it together so we're all on the same page. So what is a boundary? So let's look at the three pictures I put up here. So they're all different doors, okay? So we can almost think of the metaphor of a door to ourself, to our heart, to our emotions, our physical self. And sometimes we set a boundary by closing the door and clocking all the locks and keeping everybody and everything out. Other times we have kind of a open door policy where anyone and everything can come on in and nothing's locked. Okay, we might let in a little too much or let out a little too much. Other times it might be a little bit more of a flexible boundary, kind of like maybe a door with a screen door. So sometimes you could open it a little bit, other times you might close it. You could leave a screen so that the flies and the leaves and the dust don't come in, but the air comes in, right? So certain things come in, certain things come out, but not everything, okay? So we can vary in how flexible our boundaries are and how open or closed they are. So essentially, just like a door, a boundary represents a limit or a barrier. So a door could be a barrier to people or things coming in or out of our house, of our life. And so we could have our own sense of doing that within ourselves. Okay, so it has a containing, screening, and protective function, right? So I would close a door in order to protect myself from intruders and people who aren't supposed to be in my house, right? Boundaries determine what is let in and what is kept out, okay? So for us as individuals, that would be our emotions, our thoughts, our words, our opinions, like how much of that am I letting out and how much am I taking in from other people in terms of those things, even physical contact, right? How much am I giving and how much am I taking? And healthy boundaries, when they're done properly, can help us to feel safe, secure, and comfortable. And ultimately, that's what we're all looking for, right? We just want to feel comfortable with ourselves. We want to feel comfortable around people. We don't want to feel that we can't handle certain people or situations. We want to feel like we know what we could do, right? So we could say or do things to stay comfortable no matter who we're with. And that's what boundaries can help us to do, all right? So this is why they're so important. Okay, so our boundary styles are influenced by the way we grew up in our family, okay? So our family members, including our caregivers or parents, had their own boundary styles. And so we grew up observing those boundary styles and imitating them, or adapting our boundary styles to our caregivers so that we can maintain their care and their love. So I might have to give up certain boundaries in order to stay loved and acceptable by my parents in certain cases. Okay. Other times I might have to close off myself in order to protect myself from intrusive caregivers. So I adapted my boundaries to survive better in my own family situation. Okay. So they're adaptive responses. Okay. So even if you're struggling with your boundaries now and you're not happy with the way they are, just validate the fact that they developed for a reason and they became a certain way because they were adaptive at some point in your life. And it's certainly not too late to change them, okay? They form part of the implicit memory system in our body. So implicit memory is memory that's unconscious. It has to do with our emotional memory and our physical memory or our procedural memory, which has to do with our movements. And it's kind of built into us. And it's not just something we think in words, it's something that we do, that we feel. And so we carry it with us unconsciously in other situations now. And so when we make the unconscious conscious using sensory motor psychotherapy techniques, we could start to alter our boundaries, okay? All right. So another thing to keep in mind as well is that our boundary styles are influenced by the culture in which we're growing up. So there could be different cultures that we're connected to. There could be the larger culture of our town, of our society, of our country. There could also be the culture within our family group, especially if our family group came from a different country or a different place than where I'm currently growing up. So if my parents are from Europe, or they're from Africa, or they're from Asia, they might have a certain set of boundary styles that they're influenced by, and then they bring that into my family, and that influences the way they interact with me. But then I could go outside to school or to work or with friends, and they're more Americanized, for example, and I have that as an influence on my boundaries. Okay, so wherever you're from, just know that the culture you're in has an influence. Okay, so let's look at the pictures first. So let's say in Western countries, it's common to shake your hands. Shake hands with somebody, you know, like if you're meeting somebody or introducing to somebody. Maybe a little less so with COVID now, right? That's shifted our boundaries a little bit. But, you know, traditionally speaking, it was normal just to stand approximately as far apart as those people are and shake hands when you're introduced, right? In Arab countries, apparently they touch noses. I never knew this until I was looking up pictures for this slide. But it's actually a thing where they get close enough to touch the nose of the other person, okay? Asian countries, they might bow. Other times, you know, it might vary between the comfortable distance you have standing between people. Some cultures are comfortable standing very close, especially cultures closer to the equator, and other cultures are more comfortable standing further apart, especially if a little more north, okay? So if you look at the bottom left picture, the woman might be more comfortable with standing close to somebody, and the guy might be more comfortable with standing further apart. So he takes her closeness as intrusive, and she takes his pulling back as too distancing, right? So we have to keep that in mind, that it may not be personal. We might just be, you know, in a habit of doing certain things, and so are other people, based on certain of these culture influences, right? Another thing which was harder to illustrate in the pictures is eye contact. So as you might be aware, some cultures, it's more common to give very direct eye contact, and other ones that would be considered very rude and impolite, and avoiding eye contact is more standard, okay? Other times you might take avoiding eye contact to mean that someone's not interested in me, or they don't care, or they're not listening. But other times it's a sign of respect, right? So we have to keep that in mind. Okay, next. All right, so we're gonna go into the 4 types of boundaries that are described in sensory-motor psychotherapy. So as I describe these, we're going to do it one by one. Just kind of take inventory and see which one you tend to identify with the most. And maybe even you'll start to think, oh, this also reminds me of this person that I know, maybe a parent or a partner or a friend. And it can help you to understand that other person or people as well. Okay. So we're going to do underbounded, overbounded, pendulum, and incomplete. Okay, so here we go. We're going to start with underbounded. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that you tend to be a little bit more merged or enmeshed with other people. Okay, and so as I mentioned earlier, chances are that was enforced in your family environment. Okay, you might have had a parent who was kind of like a helicopter parent who was on top of everything. And maybe it was unclear about what it was that you wanted versus what it was that your parent wanted. So for example, let's look at this picture here. So there's a little girl, right? And different pictures, I guess, of her mother in different situations, right? And let's say the mother's offering her school books and a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and certain kinds of shoes and certain hairstyle. She's brushing her hair. And the mother is kind of like strongly influencing that girl. And because the influence is so strong and it keeps the mother's love around to go along with it, the girl might start to get confused as to like, well, what is it that I really want? Is this what I want, or is this just what my mom wanted for me? Do I really like peanut butter and jelly, or is it my mom that thinks I should like peanut butter and jelly? So it kind of gets confusing, right? And sometimes you soak up other people's feelings. And if they're upset, you tend to be upset. And there's a sense of like, in order to get along, we need to kind of be the same. We need to kind of like the same things and feel the same things. And if not, there's subtle ways of being punished for that. Okay. Or maybe blatant ways. It depends on your family. Okay. So it may not feel safe to strike out on your own and have a different feeling than other people or a different preference or opinion. You might get a lot of pressure to change back to be like the other people. And later on in your life, you might pressure people to be more like you. It might go both ways. Okay. So there might be a sense of like, if someone's being different than how I want them to be, then it's almost like a sign of rejection or disloyalty. Okay. Just a little side story. And when I was first married, my husband and I were started going on vacations together. And it seemed like, I just automatically assumed that he would want to do the same kind of things I wanted to do. So if I wanted to go on excursions in a certain country or take tours or, do certain activities, I just assumed he would want to come along with me. But it turned out that he wasn't as into those things nearly as much as I was. And sometimes he just didn't want to go. And at first I was like, oh, what do you mean? Like, it almost felt like a rejection that he didn't want to do what I wanted to do. He had a different idea of what was fun that I had. And then I had to rethink that whole thing and realize, it's all right if we want to do different things. I'll just do my own thing and he'll just do his own thing in certain, for certain activities, right? But at first I almost felt like, oh my God, like we have to do the same thing. Like, what's going on here? Why are you being different? It felt like a mini rejection. Okay. But sometimes this happens a lot in a relationship and it could create tension and it could create conflict when someone wants to be different. All right. Okay. So the last bullet, I just want to touch on that for a second. So here it says, sometimes it's safer to be merged because we can get a better sense of what's needed or wanted by our parents or caregivers. So sometimes we're even in a position of being like a parentified child when we're growing up, and we have to like look out for the needs of our parent and tend to them carefully so that we could keep their love. Like if I'm in the caregiver position, I'm making sure you're okay, and I'm, getting into that, then that keeps the relationship going. So it's better to my advantage to feel what you're feeling so that I know how to respond to you. Okay, see how that works? I'm not sure if you could identify. Okay, so we're going to have a few slides that kind of review some additional characteristics of an underbounded boundary style. Okay, so you might have more difficulty saying no than saying yes. Okay, it's much easier to say yes and go along with things and agree with other people and do what's asked than to set a boundary and say no or do something different. Okay, so it's kind of like what I was saying before. And I think the picture I found was kind of cool. Like sometimes you have the no in your head, but then you say yes out loud. So you're not able to say what you really want to do because you'll be subtly punished for it. Okay, so yeah, so you might fear that others will reject, abandon, mistreat, or be angry or disappointed in you if you say no. And that might have truly been your experience, but later on in life, you might just assume that's the way with everybody. Whereas in your life now, there might be other people who are fine with you saying no, okay? But you overassume people will be like your family members or whoever it was that reinforced your need to say yes, okay? All right, next part. So you feel like you have to please others. People pleasers. Who's a people pleaser? Okay, by giving into their needs, preferences, or desires. So it's sometimes much safer just to keep someone happy by doing what they want instead of trying to challenge them, okay? But sometimes if you're trying to please everybody and you don't please yourself, what are you left with? Resentment, right? Feeling used, taken advantage of, being the doormat, okay? Look at that picture of the girl, right? First she's saying yes, then she's bending down a little and saying, sure. And then she's completely prostrating herself and saying, no problem. But she's losing more and more self-respect and getting closer down to the floor like a doormat the further she goes, okay? And sometimes that picture, while it seems like an exaggeration, isn't too far from the truth, okay? At least in the way it feels. Okay, last part. You may have difficulty identifying your own feelings, preferences, and needs and distinguishing yours from others. All right, so I kind of covered that before. But sometimes if you're so used to just tuning into other people and making your needs, preferences, and feelings match theirs, you're not really sure what you would feel if they weren't there. Okay. All right. Next part. All right. So instead of having a sense of direction from the inside or a sense of agency, or I think I know what I want, I think I know what choice I need to make, you tend to ask other people first. Not that it's bad to always to ask an extra opinion, but you might over rely on the opinions of other people or the advice or help of other people because you're afraid, like, if I just make a choice of my own and it's wrong, someone's probably going to be mad at me. Okay, so let me just check with some other people first to make sure it's acceptable, so I can confer with them and then make the choice. So then we're sharing responsibility and no one's going to be mad at me for making the wrong choice. Okay. And sometimes you might even go as far as allowing others just to tell you what to do, think, or feel. Okay. Okay, next part. You have a desire to merge in relationships, have difficulty differentiating yourself from others, or feel hurt or rejected if they have different feelings or opinions than you do. All right, I kind of said that before, but just wanted to highlight it again. All right. And in the future, I have another book I want to make a video out of that's very specific to this. Okay, so stay tuned in the future for that. Not sure what I'm going to call it yet, but we're going to get more into it. Okay. All right. In the bottom, in relationships, you're apt to give too much and share too much too soon. Okay. So think of that open door. You're just letting too much out. Okay. And you're making yourself too vulnerable at times. Okay. And then going the other way, if someone shares a lot with you, you might have a hard time keeping the secret. You might end up just like blabbing it to somebody else just to like please the other person or get the attention or love from the other person. I'll just spill it and then maybe they'll like me better. Okay. So you might have a little hard time, maintaining confidences. Okay. It's a little hard to admit that because no one likes to admit that, right? Okay. More characteristics. So if you have trouble saying no, as you might guess or may have experienced, you might be more likely to have experienced in your past sexual abuse, physical or emotional abuse, or you might even be experiencing it now. So the other person might be so overpowering that the safest thing to do might have been to just go along with it and to just keep the person a little more in control and safe by just agreeing with the person and just going along with the routine and not fighting back. Okay. And sometimes, if that's the case, you might end up feeling bad about that or guilty about that. But sometimes it is the safest move, or it was the safest move. So you might take that tendency to not fight back and just go along with it into other situations and also make yourself unnecessarily vulnerable when setting a boundary could be possible. Okay. So just wanted to keep that in mind, to also validate yourself. This is why I might have developed this tendency, because it was adapted in that abusive situation. All right. Okay. Sometimes a consequence of being underbounded from your own interactions with others, kind of like the part where I talked about oversharing, is you might, get a little physically too close and make other people uncomfortable, even if you don't mean to. Or you might end up being a little too intrusive or needy or violate someone else's boundaries, because maybe their boundaries are a little bit more bound than yours. So you may not intentionally do this, but your style might be underbounded to the degree where other people are feeling intruded upon. Okay. So it's important to be aware of how others respond to you and view your boundary style, because that might influence, and motivate you to make it a little bit tighter, a little bit more flexible. Okay. All right. Other times, you might find it so easy to empathize with others' emotions that you might easily give up your side of the story or your opinion just to agree with them. So you're easily knocked off center because you're not even sure what your center is. So you might have seen something a certain way and told the event a certain way and had a certain feeling about it. But as soon as someone else told their side, you just threw yours out the window and agreed with them. Okay, so sometimes that happens as well. Okay, all right. However, although there's some negative aspects of being underbounded, right, there are some upsides. Okay. And there's circumstances where it's appropriate to be a little underbounded and know when to let the boundaries loose. Okay. So because the boundaries are very permeable, it helps you to be more sensitive and aware of other people. It helps you to really connect with other people and make it possible. Okay. And people tend to be more empathic and attuned when they're underbounded because they're able to let other people's stuff in. Okay. The problem is when we let it in too much and it impacts our well-being. But to a degree, when this can be managed and used appropriately, there are these upsides. Okay. It makes you a sensitive person. It makes you a compassionate, likable, connectable person. All right. Okay. Underbounded body language. Okay, so because this is sensory motor psychotherapy, we always have to tune into the body, right? And pay attention to that. So let's look at some of the pictures. Okay, so the girl on the left picture is kind of like leaning over, leaning into the guy, right? Kind to merge with him a little bit. And sometimes that's appropriate, like if you're flirting with somebody or you're trying to get to know somebody. Okay, otherwise, certain circumstances, you might make yourself a little too vulnerable too soon with people you don't know well enough yet. Okay, sometimes if you're in an abusive situation, such as being sexually harassed in the workplace, like the second picture, you may really be worried about setting a boundary and fighting back because you feel like maybe my job could be at stake, right? If I report this person or protest, I could be in trouble. So you might have that kind of collapsed, weak feeling in yourself, kind of not as guarded as you may want to be. In the third picture, let's say it's a mother and a daughter, okay? And let's say the mother on the right is saying things that are uncomfortable to the daughter on the left, maybe feels intrusive, but instead of setting a boundary, she kind of just collapses a little bit and just takes it, because maybe she doesn't want to start a big argument by, setting a boundary and being different or saying to knock it off, okay? And let's say in the fourth picture, sometimes at work, you end up being the person everyone dumps work on because you always say yes to it. No matter what they ask you to do, even stuff outside your job description, you just kind of say okay. And so people start dumping work on you and okay, kind of like that woman there. She's not fighting back, okay? So the body language might give the message that you can't protect or defend yourself, or that your sense of self is weak or easy manipulated to do the bidding of other people, right? To kind of go along with what other people want. And again, there's certain circumstances where this is adaptive, but other times where you might not want to continue with this, where it's no longer adaptive. Okay, so there's some somatic resources, like ways we could use our body to combat some of these underbounded body language style. So let's look on the left. So let's say you have that collapsed body language of an underbounded style, and you're trying to use your body to help you set a boundary that's a little stronger in a certain interaction. So some of the suggested somatic resources you can use would make your body feel like a little bit stronger, okay? So grounding by pressing your feet into the floor, okay, is one way, okay? So feeling like you could stand on your own 2 feet, you could defend yourself, and you could say no. It enforces that feeling, okay? Next, instead of having collapsed posture, which could feel a little weak, vulnerable, or submissive, you're gonna make an effort to align your posture and, stand up a little taller, okay, with a little bit more strength and confidence. Other times, you could use a gesture that shows like something like a pushing motion, like a no. And that could help you set the boundary, okay? Next, okay, so we're gonna move on to the overbounded style, okay? So this is like when your door is locked here, like there's a whole bunch of locks, there's a sword and a baseball bat on the side, it's propped closed by a chair. So sometimes, as you can see, unless it's in a really bad neighborhood where this would be very adaptive, it could be a little bit of overkill. So you're closing the door and locking the door where maybe it would be okay sometimes to open it, even a little bit, okay? So try to notice if this is your style, right? Or the style of somebody you know. Okay, so what are some characteristics of an overbounded boundary style? So unlike the other one that's underbounded, where you tend to say yes, but you can't say no, this one you tend to say an automatic no, And sometimes you have a hard time being open enough to say yes. Okay. So it might be hard for you to say yes, even if the request seems reasonable, because you're afraid of being vulnerable or being taken advantage of, or thinking, oh, what does it mean to give in? That means I'm weak, right? It might have certain meanings attached to it, or early experiences attached to it that feel undesirable. Okay. So are you an automatic no person? Okay. You might believe that the wall you put up, okay, think of like a brick wall. It's not very permeable, right? It's very solid. You might think that wall's a healthy boundary, but the thing is, it might be too thick. It might be too much. Kind of like, wearing a snowsuit in Florida. Okay, so it's like a little too much protection for what you need. In Florida, you can use shorts and a t-shirt. That would be enough protection, but you're putting on a big overcoat, right? Way too much protection. Okay, so the wall keeps out too much, even the good. So that's the disadvantage. You feel protected, but not connected. Okay, underbounded, you feel connected, but not protected. Okay. So you might find that, let's go to the last one here. You tend to prefer more distance in your relationships. You don't like getting too close to people. If things get too close, you might unconsciously start to do things to create more distance with another person. Okay. And contact with others might feel invasive, because maybe earlier on in your life, it was invasive and you coped by putting up a wall, right? If you had really intrusive parents and that was way too much for you, your reaction to that might be putting up a wall. Okay. All right. Next, you might be uncomfortable revealing personal information, and don't solicit personal information from others. Okay. So it's kind of like, I'm not letting much out and I'm not letting much in. Okay. In contrast to underbounded, sorry, I'm getting the word mixed up, where your boundaries are too loose, where you let in too much and let out too much. Okay. This one, there's not much coming in or out. Okay, it's hard for people to get to know you. It's hard for you to get to know other people because maybe you don't want to open up too much and get them to be intrusive. Oh no, right? So you tend to be a little more self-reliant and independent, right? When you are in relationship, it's a little more distant, but you tend to be able to feel like I'm self-sufficient. I'm better doing things by myself. I don't particularly like to work in groups. I'll just handle it. You rarely ask maybe for other people's feelings or about a situation or feedback or advice or help. You'd rather just try to figure it out yourself. Okay. Contrast to the other one where you might always solicit other people's feedback and advice before acting. Here, you might rarely do that. Okay, next one. You might perceive others as a potential threat and have difficulty with trust, intimacy, and vulnerability. Okay, so if you've had bad experiences feeling intruded upon or feeling criticized or feeling invaded, yeah, of course you have difficulties trusting that people are going to be appropriate and respectful and validating, right? You might just be like, oh, I don't want to even get into that, right? So it might feel emotionally threatening to get close to people. So it's hard for you to let down your guard, of course, right? All right. The trouble is you might find yourself too isolated, right? So it's safer to be alone, but then you feel kind of lonely sometimes, okay? So that's some of the trouble. So, and even when you're with people, you might be doing stuff with people, but there might be an emotional distance between you and other people. So you feel like that guy kind of around other people, but feeling kind of alone in the crowd. You know, you might be one of those guys. All right. The other disadvantage is that if you're not letting people in and you're not letting much out, you're not really letting in their emotions either, or you're not really allowing yourself to resonate with them, to feel a little bit of what they're feeling. And if you don't do that, then it's very hard to have empathy, because in order to empathize, you have to feel with the other person. But if you're not allowing to feel with, you might intellectually understand, but you may not have that visceral understanding of what someone else is going through. And therefore, it's harder to connect with others. Okay. And so others might therefore perceive you as being kind of emotionally unavailable, closed, insensitive, or even inconsiderate or abrasive, right? It may not be what's really going on in your mind or your point of view, but it may come across that way. It might seem like you don't care or you're cold because it feels too vulnerable to resonate with other people and feel what they're feeling. Okay. All right. So just like underbounded. There's an upside of being overbounded. Okay. So you are protected, right? It protects your sense of self. You do have a strong wall. Okay. So sometimes that's good. Okay. And you have less influence over you of other people's opinions and feelings. So if someone's really upset, or someone's trying to persuade you, or someone's trying to, influence you in a strong way, you may be a little much more immune to that, kind of like the woman in the bubble. So, if other people are trying to, influence her in a negative way, maybe she doesn't let that in. But the problem is, if someone's trying to influence you in a positive way, you may not let that in either. So you may not let in useful feedback because you have too much of a bubble. Okay. All right. And if you're very independent because you're overbounded, you might be somebody who's good at a time of stress because you're not letting in everyone else's emotions. You're not letting that intrude on your well-being. You're able to focus. You're able to take charge, be self-sufficient, take care of events in a crisis without getting overwhelmed emotionally by it. So sometimes that's very important. Okay. All right. So overbounded body language. So basically, there's a tension involved. So increased muscular tonicity. All right. It's a fancy way of saying you're kind of tense, guarded. So you're muscled up to protect yourself like armor against the influence of other people and their emotions and opinions and everything else. Okay. So unlike the collapsed, loose, body language of overbounded, this is a little bit more tense and distant for the overbounded. I'm sorry if I'm mixing up over and under. It's a little confusing sometimes to me. But anyway, basically, it's kind of like it helps to communicate that you just want to be left alone. You don't want people too close. Maybe you're doing your own thing, right? And it helps you keep that wall. All right. So just like there's somatic resources for an underbounded style, there's also somatic resources for an overbounded style. Okay. So one of the things that could be scary if you're overbounded is I fear that people are going to be too invasive and make me feel really intruded upon and uncomfortable. So I just keep things closed automatically to protect myself. All right. And I don't want to lose control and have my defenses ripped away from me and be invaded. Okay. Well, what you could do is start to learn to recognize what's going on and make mindful decisions to control how much you open and when you close. So if you feel like you can control the opening and the closing, and it's not going to be an out of control process, you're going to be more likely to start to develop that flexibility. Okay. So related to that is instead of feeling like I'm going to be totally knocked off center if someone invades me, and I'm going to feel really disgusting and invaded and uncomfortable, I'm going to try to develop a stronger, physically felt sense of self, a stronger core, so that if I do open up, I'll feel solid within myself and I'm not going to be just totally thrown off. Okay, so that's kind of interesting if you think about it. So both underbounded and overbounded need to develop a stronger core. Okay, so no matter where you're coming from, that's a really important thing to do. All right. Next. Okay, so this is what they call the pendulum style. Okay, so basically what this means is you're pendulating like a pendulum on a clock, okay, like an old-fashioned clock, between underbounded and overbounded. You're going back and forth depending on the circumstance. Okay, so here's how things might go. So the underbounded picture, kind of picture as a metaphor, like two trees that are kind of growing into each other. And sometimes it's hard to even know which branches from which tree because they're kind of just all blended together. Okay. Whereas overbounded, it's very clear where the separation is. There's almost like a wall between the two trees, or there might as well be. They're very separate. All right. So underbounded. So let's say I'm on the underbounded side and I'm with somebody and I feel like I'm opening up a lot, right? I'm letting them in and I'm sharing a lot and I'm getting closer, and things feel pretty good for a while, but all of a sudden it feels like too much. Uh-oh, I opened up too much. Or maybe now they're not responding as well to me, or we have a difference of something. And now I feel disappointed, let down, or overwhelmed or vulnerable. Okay, whoops, too open. So I might swing to the other extreme and put up a wall and get overbounded, right? So then I might start to push people away and close down and completely swing the other direction. I might go from over trusting to under trusting, right? Too open to too closed. So I stay closed for a while. Okay, relax. All right. Now I feel safe again. All right, that's good. But wait a minute. Now I'm feeling a little too lonely. I feel a little too isolated, alienated, disconnected, too much aloneness, right? Maybe I need to connect again. So now I might go all the way back to the other extreme. So I may break down walls, merge, cling, connect with people, and go the extreme the other way, right? And round and around it goes. So this might swing back and forth depending on, certain triggers, certain people, situations might influence me to go back and forth, or just that process of feeling too violated versus feeling too alone. All right. However, if this is done in a positive way, at the upside of pendulum boundaries, this idea of being able to flexibly move between being open and being closed is really the ideal. Okay. So we want to kind of just modulate that so it's not as extreme. And there's also some, gray areas in between. All right. So this is what they call, it sounds kind of more negative than it really is, but it's called incomplete boundaries. But essentially what they mean is that most of the time, under average circumstances, you're able to exercise healthy boundaries, right? So you could say yes when you want to say yes. You could say no when you want to say no. Your body language matches up with your message of yes or no. And you're pretty effective in, feeling comfortable with other people, not letting people invade you, not invading other people, things like that. Okay, but still feeling connected. So you're mostly protected and connected, but there's certain circumstances where you might not be able to keep the healthy boundary. So let's say most of the time I'm able to do it, but if I get together with my parents, such as like in this picture, there's something about the way they push my buttons and all of a sudden I'm a little girl again who can't keep my boundaries and I feel invaded and I go along with what they want and I can't keep what I want to do and I just get swept away by their needs and wants. Okay. So sometimes it's certain people that do that to you, right? Think of who that might be. Okay. And those might be the areas to target because you know how to do it certain times, but it has to be generalized to additional situations. All right. Other times, kind of like vulnerability to negative emotions, like DBT talks about ABC pleas, which are skills for reducing vulnerability to negative emotions. If you're vulnerable to negative emotions, you might also be vulnerable to having ineffective boundaries. So when I'm not in the right state of mind, or I'm feeling more emotional, or maybe I'm hungry, angry, lonely, tired, I didn't get a good sleep, I'm not eating right, I'm not exercising right, I'm not physically my best self, I might be a little more likely to not have the boundaries that I usually have, right? I might be too harsh and too closed, or I might be way too open, and then later on I regret it. Okay, so there's that body component too. Okay. Okay, we made it to the exercises. I know the video is long, but I wanted to be thorough, so I hope you'll hang in with me. And if it's too much for now, just come back another time and do the exercises. Okay. All right, so here we go. Practice these. All right, so we're going to go with the 4 boundary styles we just reviewed, okay, and then describe what you experience in your body for each boundary style. Whoops. So chances are you might have been in each of these at some point or other, but you have a dominant style. But try to think of things where you were in each style, and for each one, what happens to your body, right? And then go to the healthy one, all right? So do the healthy one last, right? So it stays fresh in your mind. And say, well, okay, what are some healthy elements to the boundary style that, like the way it felt in my body that felt good when I was having healthy boundaries, okay? How could I describe that physically? What was happening with me, right? Maybe my posture felt better. Maybe I felt a strength in my core. Maybe my chin was a little bit more up. Maybe I was able to like make a gesture of knock it off, okay? And how could I further embody those resources and use them in situations where I have a hard time holding my boundaries? Okay, so I'm kind of like mining some of the good stuff about the healthy and then applying it to situations where I tend to be more unhealthy. Okay, So practice embodying this resource in those situations. Okay, so this one has a couple of parts, but the first part here are examples of physical things that help you say no, okay? Physical gestures and expressions and movements that reinforce the no you're trying to say, okay? So take a screenshot of this. This is a really important one. So, but I'm gonna read through it with you just to make sure you got it. So you can make a stern or firm facial expression, okay? Show with your face that you mean business, okay? Narrow your eyes or glare, right? If you really stare someone down, you're showing them you're serious, right? Tighten your jaw or thrust it forward. Cross your arms or legs, all right? So you're armoring up to help you say that no, okay? It's like the girl in the picture. All right, tighten your body, clench your fists, okay? Not that I'm saying get into a fist fight, okay? But sometimes it helps bring a sense of strength, even if they're at your side. Display an aggressive posture, if appropriate, okay? Square your shoulders or hunch them forward, right? So you're showing them tough, okay? If necessary, make physical contact by hitting or pushing, okay? Again, I'm not advocating physical aggression, but in certain situations, then you have to defend yourself, you might have to actually do that, okay? But again, please, as appropriate. Other times, it could be a little bit different. So leaning away, turning away, moving away, or walking away. All right. If someone's really pissing you off or really getting inappropriate, just walk out of the room, just leave. Okay. Avoid eye contact, look down or away. Don't even look at the person. Don't give them the time of day. Right. That's another way to say no. Retract your head or move it backwards. All right. Shake your head no. Okay. Push away with your hands. You can use that gesture. Make a stop sign or gesture with your hands. Okay. Other times, this one's a little bit more on the sarcastic end, okay? Depending on who you're with, might be effective. Roll your eyes or close your eyes. Sigh with exasperation or disgust. Oh, laugh or snicker, right? If you laugh at someone's request, it's kind of obvious that you're not going for it, right? Raise one or both eyebrows and change your voice tone, all right? Is my voice tone expressing my no, or am I having a kind of a weak, wishy-washy voice that's not quite reinforcing my no, okay? But all of these are really important. And if you're not doing them, try to add these to your repertoire when you're trying to say no. Okay, so now we're gonna try this out. So first, take note of any ways you non-verbally say no that you remember using in the past. So where have you actually done these before? Can you think of a time where you believe you did at least a couple of these, all right? So describe any memories of saying no with your body that stand out to you, okay? So kind of write that down if you want, if you're journaling about this stuff. Then we're gonna bring it forward into our life this next week. Okay, so throughout the week, just kind of make it your personal assignment to notice your interactions with others and kind of highlight and notice which ways you've said no with your body. So if you did have to say no throughout the week in some way or another, even minor things, did your body reinforce your no? And in what way? Okay, so again, going back to this list. All right, so here's a couple other trick questions. Well, maybe just a little tricky. So at the end of the week, look back and describe a situation in which the way you set or conveyed a boundary was ineffective. All right, so hey, no one's perfect all the time. If you tried to say no and it didn't work out the way you wanted, just notice what happened, okay? And if you were to do it again in a similar situation, how would you do it more effectively? By using your body to help you say no. And how would you say something different? How would you maybe use your words differently also? Okay, so using some of the things you learned from 1 and 2, right, and from here, how would you do it over again if you weren't happy with a situation this week where you didn't say no the way you really wanted to? All right, and 6, practice saying the words out loud while you simultaneously convey your boundary with your body. Okay, you could do this by yourself in the secret of your own little house or your own little room, or you could practice it with somebody if you want to, okay? And just notice what that feels like. How does it feel to actually say no firmly and use your body to reinforce it? It might be like a brand new experience, right? But let's check it out, see how it feels. Okay, so now we're gonna move to saying yes, okay? So this is especially for people who have a hard time saying yes, such as people who are overbounded, right? And tend to give an automatic no. So here are some physical ways that help us to say yes. Okay, good smile, right? Yes is kind of an openness, a smile. Yeah, let's do it, right? Use an open and relaxed posture. If you're a radically open DBT person, the big 3+1 would apply here. Okay, open your hands or arms, tilt your head to one side, kind of like in a flirtatious way, I guess. Soften your muscles. Take a breath, emphasizing the exhale, because exhale has to do with relaxation when we have a longer exhale. So we don't want to tense against something. We want to relax into something. You could also raise your eyebrow, like an eyebrow wag. Make eye contact, show that you're listening, you're open to it. Say yes with your eyes, okay? Or blink or bat your eyes, okay? Appropriately, obviously, all right? Sometimes it's moving forward or close to somebody, right? Rather than pulling away and like, oh, I don't want to do that. Oh, okay, let's do it, right? Possibly, if it's appropriate, making physical contact, shaking someone's hand, tapping their shoulder, their arm, hugging somebody if it's appropriate, reaching out in some way, turning your body toward, nodding your head. Yes, okay? So all these are examples of ways you could physically help your yes. All right, so similar questions to the other one. So think of times in the past where you said yes and your nonverbals helped to support that yes. So think of those memories where you said yes with your body and notice which parts you might have done based on this list here. Okay, so now going forward in your week, right, take note each day of times when you said yes and used your body to help you say yes. Okay, then at the end of the week, here's some interesting questions. Look back to see if there's any times where you wanted to say yes, but you didn't. Okay, maybe like a friend invited you to a craft fair and you're like, I don't know, part of me wants to go, but part of me is like, well, it's going to be crowded and the parking's bad and I really have other chores to do. So I said no. But socially, if my goal was to connect with people, I probably should have said yes. I should have done something a little different and got out a little bit, but I didn't say that yes. Okay. So if I wanted to say yes, but I didn't, how did my body help me refrain from saying that yes? Right? Did I end up tightening up in some way, and use some of those no body language things to prevent me from saying a yes? Right? All right. Now, next question. Recall any moments in the past week where you wanted to say no, but you said yes instead. Okay. We asked to help somebody sweep their backyard and you really didn't want to do it because it's your neighbor and he asks you for favors all the time, but you're kind of busy, but you're like, okay, I'll do it, but you didn't really want to do it. So in that moment, how did it feel in your body? What was your body language like? That reinforced the yes instead of the no. Okay, now, based on those examples, okay, maybe some other things you're thinking of, describe any changes you would like to make in the nonverbal ways you say yes and no to others, right? Are there nonverbals that you would like to add to your repertoire to strengthen your yes and to strengthen your no, okay? The examples I gave in the book are, I'd like to move forward and touch my kids more appropriately. I would like to keep my body relaxed and maintain eye contact when I say no, all right? But think of what applies to you. How would you like to strengthen your yes and no with other kinds of body language? Okay, so this one's called a tangible boundary exercise. Now, there was another version of this in lesson 19 about somatic sense of boundaries, but we're going to do it again, but with a little extra twist. So that one in the other lesson, I believe, was doing it by yourself. But this one, you're going to be doing it with either a therapist, if you have one, or another trusted person who you believe would be able to respectfully help you with this exercise. And you could probably take turns also. Maybe someone else wants you to help them, and then they could help you. Okay, so here's the deal. So you sit on a floor or on a chair, and then you use whatever objects you want that are just kind of around to construct a tangible boundary. Okay, so it could be some grocery bags, it could be some of your kids' toys, it could be pillows, it could be, piled up blankets, whatever it is you want to use to kind of create like a wall kind of around yourself and construct it however you want and put it together in a way that feels comfortable. All right, keep adjusting it till it feels right. So then, make it a stick. Sorry, I just want to add a couple of instructions I forgot to say. So you could control how large it is, like you want it tight around you, or you want it kind of like further away from you, giving you a little more wiggle room on the inside. You could control how high or how low it is. Maybe the shape you want to control or where you sit within it, you want to change and play around with. Okay, it really does feel different. It's interesting. And if you notice any areas where you feel unprotected or vulnerable, you could just build up the boundary a little bit more. Like, let's say, I feel pretty good about it, but around my back, I feel a little more vulnerable because I can't see back there. So I think I want to make the part in the back a little stronger or higher, and then I'll feel a little bit better. Okay, so just play with it and notice how you feel. Okay, so continuing with this exercise. So after each prompt below, just notice the effect on your building blocks. So the building blocks today we're going to look at are thoughts, emotions, body sensations, movements, or the way your body wants to move, and any images or memories that come up, because maybe it'll remind you of something from the past. Okay, so number one, we're going to set the tangible boundary. So this is just what we were talking about here. So after you set your boundary and you make it, just physically sense your space and how it's impacting your building blocks. Okay, the next, this is the twist that involves the other person. Okay, so if your therapist or friend slowly crosses your tangible boundary physically, like slowly walks into your space without invitation, how does that feel in your building blocks? Okay, so you're going to be asking them to do this, right? Just for the sake of the exercise, but do it slowly. And as they continue to get closer and cross your boundary, notice how it feels. Notice the different building blocks. Then the next one's called respect of a boundary. So now you're going to have your therapist or friend move back out of your boundary. So first they crossed it, and now they're leaving it, giving you back the space. So notice what that feels with your building blocks. Then I'm going to reestablish your boundary. So you're going to have your therapist or friend cross your boundary again, but this time you're going to take action to push him or her out with your hands. Okay, you're not going to beat them up. You're going to do something slowly, maybe a slow pushing, just a feeling that you're noticing within yourself of what it's like to have the power to push somebody back out of your boundary after it's been crossed. So very important. You could do each of these a few times if you need it, but again, just really tune into what your building blocks feel like and capture some of the important stuff so that you could use it again later if you need it. Okay, especially this feeling of strength of pushing somebody out. Okay, just wanted to highlight, because boundaries are such an important and popular topic, there's two other videos that I have that particularly talk about these. So one, again, like I mentioned before, is the somatic sense of boundaries from sensory motor psychotherapy. So it's in my playlist of somatic sensory motor psychotherapy. Okay, so this one is a little different from the one we did today because it focuses more on how we could physically sense when our boundaries being violated and when we need more of a boundary. And it goes into a lot more depth about what healthy boundaries are and what they involve. Okay, whereas this one was talking about other boundary styles predominantly and just touched a tiny bit on the healthy boundary. Okay, also, if you're somebody who tends to be overbounded, like you have too much of a wall, any of the radically open DBT videos are probably good for you. But in particular, lesson 20, which is called Enhancing Social Connectedness, gives a little bit more about dealing with your overbounded boundary style and learning how to open it up a little bit. Okay, but in general, if that's your style, if you're anxious avoidant attachment and you tend to be too walled off, too closed, radically open DBT stuff is better for you. Okay, all right. I know this was long, so I appreciate. Whoops. Sorry, I'm trying to get back to my video here. Stop share. Oh, sorry. Oh man, it's been a long video, huh? So I hope this was helpful for you. I appreciate you tuning in and listening, and I'll be back soon with number 33. All right, take care, everybody.